General Raziq was an important ally for Americans in Afghanistan during the global war on terrorism. Raziq's growing importance put a target on his back. After his 2011 promotion to police chief, he found himself at the top of the Taliban's most wanted list. Raziq always seems to be one step ahead of the Taliban, thanks to extensive intelligence contacts on both sides of the Pakistan border. But the Taliban continued to send martyrs, suicide bombers, and insider threats who burrowed under cover until given the signal to turn on their unwitting ex-comrades. How long could Raziq survive? In the summer of 2012, Americans began to withdraw their surge forces from Afghanistan. Lieutenant Colonel Terry Nihart was assigned to partner with Raziq's security forces in Kandahar city. His goal was to help develop a sustainable Afghan force, one that could operate after the Americans left. Nihart described Raziq by this point.
He was so charismatic and he was very, very, very effective. Oftentimes wanting to lead the charge with or without the American forces to support him. He had sort of this deity-like status amongst the Afghans, especially amongst the police, because of all the different attempts on his life that he survived, and just, he had always seemed to be very effective in battle. And so he was like a celebrity. He really was. He had his entourage, but he was sort of always separated, just like a celebrity would be, from the masses. But when he was out and about, it literally was like watching, Brad Pitt walk down the street or something. I mean, he was very, very popular. He was very bright in terms of he could understand tactical concepts and strategic concepts very well. He actually thought that way quite frequently, strategically, at the bigger picture, and oftentimes was 5 or 6 waves ahead of anything we were thinking of, because it's really hard for those of us who come in and do a rotation to get all the way into the cultural dynamics, right? Because it gets tribal, there's so many layers that we're not going to penetrate in a 9-month rotation. But it's basically because he understands the whole, all the inner dynamics of everything from the car's eyes down to the local police commanders, and what happens.
Managing supplies was a constant struggle. Nihart had to meet many times with logistics officials in Raziq's organization. Supplies tended to disappear when units changed location. In the meantime, the American police commander became concerned about Taliban infiltration within the Afghan Republic's forces. The scale of the attack on the 9th of July suggested someone on the inside of the Afghan police headquarters must have been involved. Here's Nihart on the incident.
With myself and their logistics officer going over he had a big ledger, and we were kind of going over how he tracked stuff. He was telling me how he tracked his supplies, and that explosion happened. It blew us both all the way across the room, over couches and everything else. That's how big the explosion was. Knocked out for quite a while. But anyway, when they blew that hole in the wall there, a bunch of them funneled through, and there were, I want to say 3 or 4 who basically had satchels of grenades and were just going room to room throwing grenades in the rooms. So nobody could get to where we were, and we couldn't get out. There was only one stairwell, and that stairwell had been mostly blown up, and then it had 2 people standing in it with rifles. So, and then they were launching the RPGs from the school. So what really happened was like 90 minutes of chaos, literally of people just running around randomly, like at a paintball park, but with real guns, right? Just craziness.
Command Sergeant Major Billy Counts recalled coordinating the response in the Operations Center, thanks to a close relationship with 8-1 Cavalry Squadron.
3 or 4 guys got it and started, just creating havoc. Freaking the Kandak, the Afghans were just spraying and praying. I think they destroyed like 70 something freaking AK-47s that night. Just barrels. They fired them till they ran out of ammunition. Barrels bent on them, but it was just mass chaos. But I'm sitting in the talk. I'm like, son of a bitch. The one day I don't go out with him, he's over there. But Michaelis and Neary come in, and I turned and looked at him, and he says, Sergeant Major, my entire cavalry squadron is at your command. I said, I don't command shit, but between me and XO, it was, he said, where do you need us to go? And that was the relationship, because they knew it was, it wasn't our fight, and it hadn't got to that point yet, but they had people on, so we were just doing basically this ad hoc multi-unit task force operating out of our talk right there.
One of Raziq's police commanders was the first to respond to the attack, followed closely by the 8-1 Cav. The new arrivals pinned the insurgents within the compound and took them out one by one. Then, as focus turned outside the compound to insurgent holdouts in the schoolhouse, Raziq began to take charge.
Because, Raziq's the guy who runs to the sound of the battle and is the first guy in. And so we were able to contain him a little while. But then Raziq grabbed a force, like I told you, and he left the compound and went around to the school. And just as we were getting ready to use close air support on the school to take out all the Taliban that were in there, he actually entered the building, and him and his crew cleared it. But yeah, the police I think did a great job in general, but it was hard to tell a lot of times who was friendly and who wasn't, just because of the insider attack sort of threat.
Lieutenant Colonel Nihart counted 22 insurgents killed in action, but many more may have blended into the chaos and escaped into the Afghan countryside. Ultimately, the incident revealed how tenuous a hold Raziq's forces had on Kandahar during Taliban offensives. Americans who deployed to Kandahar in different periods of the global war on terrorism often claimed Raziq's tenure was more stable and secure than the periods that preceded or followed. From his promotion in 2012 until his assassination in 2018, some made the case for a golden age of security in the American war. Raziq helped to professionalize Kandahar's police. He accepted American reforms. He held subordinates accountable for their mistakes. He hired dozens of new technicians to disarm IEDs across the province. Taliban attacks dropped from 150 in 2011 to 60 during the first year after Raziq's promotion. Lieutenant Colonel Mark Tamola, 7th Special Forces Group, described the transition.
The key individual was General Raziq, which I'm sure his name's come up. He kind of made his start in Spin Bulldog down on the border, where he controlled, inflow and outflow. So he made a lot of money and made a lot of, created a lot of power. And he partnered very early. And as U.S. SOF commanders grew up, he maintained those partnerships and kind of increased his WASTA, both between knowing and being able to get U.S. Support, and then also just being a savvy Afghan warlord, commander. So, and while I think other Afghan leaders saw him as an upstart, he had the WASTA to back it up. There were multiple attempts on his life that were unsuccessful. He had, but he built through that. He was able to take control of and establish security on those major trafficking routes. Think about where the ring road was going and the major security efforts in the United States. Those were areas we were concerned about.
But for members of tribal networks shoved aside during this period, Raziq's rise to power was a threatening development. Some Americans, such as intelligence officer Marshall Rogers, became concerned about potential consequences of leaving Raziq in charge. Vendors had begun to sell a t-shirt that read, "What would Raziq do?"
I think it was a very inside joke, kind of like ironic, what would he do? Probably murder some people, That was the sense I always got. And they were happy to work with him, but it was also like, because we gotta, and he's the guy, so we're gonna work with him. And when you are talking about this type of agency, like, they've got to work with people all over the world that are terrible. And so for them, it's a lot less of a moral conundrum, because their whole deal is like, we're looking for intelligence and we're trying to do whatever it takes to get our kind of country's aims met.
Rogers recalled a 2015 incident in which he suspected Raziq had manipulated U.S. assets. At the time, Rogers worked in the intelligence section of the Southern Regional Command.
TAC South had decent strike authority, so they could conduct some kinetic strikes if they had a lot of Afghan support and buy-in and like very specific requests from the Afghans. And so one night Raziq was coordinating with TAC South to strike. What he was saying was, these big movements of Taliban fighters, and TAC South is doing ISR. They're seeing these trucks of fighters, it's the middle of the night. And so they strike it, and they kill, I think it was upwards of 24 guys, and take out a couple technicals. Like, feels like a very successful strike. When they did the BDA, these were all Afghans, like Afghan army. And as we unpeeled the onion from that, it turned out they were Afghan border police doing their own drug facilitation, rivaling Raziq's. So he basically used us to take a hit out on his competitors, which was kind of chilling for me. Like, going from that previous deployment of mine where like kinetic strikes were so intensely targeted, and like I knew these people's names. We, had been tracking them for days and weeks in some cases. And then this, at this later stage of the war is a lot more like, hey, they're saying to like hit some trucks. I see guys in trucks with guns, let's do it. And then it turns out like we're being manipulated by Raziq to take out other Afghan security forces who are like in his lane. And it was very like, oh my God, this is a tough look.
Others in the war effort, including Army National Guard officers sent from California to advise Raziq, saw him as someone who truly wanted to help bring a diplomatic end to the conflict. Here's Raziq's final U.S. advisor from 2018, Lieutenant Colonel Kinsey Clark.
I don't think he wore the uniform after I got there, but I remember him saying something like, I don't wear the uniform anymore, man. I'm a man of peace. It was like, oh, okay, sure. I mean, I kind of got what he was saying. Like, he's trying to transcend this reputation for being like a fighter, and he wants to be known as like a peacemaker. And I think that was part of like the persona.
As Americans reduced their military presence from 2014 to 2018, Raziq began to take center stage in the partnership. 5 years before, he had been working with battalion commanders. Now, he met with top U.S. officials in the country, to include General Scott Miller. Generals Miller and Raziq had planned a meeting in support of upcoming national elections, which needed secure polling places in order to encourage turnout. Raziq's forces had recently been engaged in cross-border skirmishes with Pakistani frontier guards. The Taliban had stepped up other efforts to embed martyrs within Raziq's own force. It was a security guard employed by Kandahar's governor who shot and killed General Raziq. His advisor, Kinsey Clark, recalled the fatal meeting on October 18th.
I was not near him. I was kind of so it was in the backyard, and I would say like I was in like a side yard when me and the aides, I was actually kind of bullshitting with the aides, and we were kind of like bullshitting by one of the Lexuses. We heard the other 3 guys knew immediately what it was. And then we all just went running over there. Probably about 5 to 10 minutes of like kind of total chaos, just people running around. So, immediate response, shoot the assassin. He dies like pretty much instantaneously. Other people are wounded in the attack. We're applying life-saving measures. Medics are running to people. Like Smiley got saved. I mean, Smiley's pretty much 100% now.
General Jeffrey Smiley, commander of the California National Guard Advisors, was injured in the attack.
Remember, I'm just along for the ride. This is General Miller's, program, so I'm not doing any press releases or anything like that. And we're walking back and heading to the airfield, and everybody's just saying goodbye. And that's when this guy took advantage of, the situation. I remember exactly what I said to General Nazar. I mean, I remember exactly. And then it felt like being hit with about 1,000 marbles. Like somebody took a bag of marbles and hit every spot in my body, my toes, whatever. And then I heard the firing, and we got behind a LVAB that was there, and General Miller yelled over to me, "Are you up? Are you up? Smiley, are you up?" And then he goes, "Action front, action front."
So the command party, Miller and like the 6 other generals that he brought with him, they're all waiting in the back. This attack happens. The aides drove one of the Lexuses in. And that was a little hairy because, man, they drove it like they stole it. Like they didn't give a shit and this is like a crowded backyard. They drove the Lexus in there, threw Raziq in the back of that thing and took off trying to save him. But the people I've talked to said like he was dead. Like, I mean, got ripped open. I mean, it was more or less a point blank shot, and he took majority of the round, so he had no chance.
Raziq's legacy splintered immediately upon his passing. Those who worked with him mourned the loss of a courageous and tireless ally. Those who had opposed him breathed a sigh of relief as a reign of terror ended. Some believed it was not the Taliban, but Americans or members of the Afghan Republic who had given the fatal order. Rumors continued to swirl for years afterwards. Throughout his career, Raziq provoked deep disagreements within the American-led coalition in Afghanistan. He seems to have inspired more passion among his fellow Afghans. He continues to be the subject of tribute songs on YouTube. No comparable American military figure has inspired such musical tributes, certainly not since World War II, and perhaps not ever. Are these Afghan musicians deluded for admiring such a warlord? Or is their longing for strength and stability understandable? A desperate search for heroes may result from the waves of war that have ruined the country for generations. Here's Lieutenant Colonel Tamola on the importance of partnership across cultures.
Are we building sustainable solutions for our partners? Some of those things that are less savory for us but are sustainable, like Raziq, he derived his power from most likely some illicit activities. And this is kind of hard to say. I prefer transparency, honesty, like morally, ethically, validated, but there also has to be a level of what is sustainable for our partners, and what's our role in it. We also can't take upon ourselves the full responsibility. It's almost oxymoronic. Like, we want to build a free and democratic society by imposing control through the military. I don't know. That one probably deserves more deep thought.
Ultimately, Afghanistan after General Raziq's assassination left more questions than answers about how Americans, from the outside, could help a nation survive a brutal insurgency well-resourced from safe havens across the region. General Raziq's legacy weighs heavily on Afghanistan today. Both critics and collaborators consider him a potent symbol of resistance against the Taliban and the dangers of foreign military partnership.